Toxic masculinity is something that we absolutely need to keep our society functioning, and in this video I'm going to explain exactly why that is the case. Okay, so when it comes to talking about toxic masculinity, we often do not do it with a whole lot of nuance. Here's how these conversations usually tend to go. Somebody will say toxic masculinity is bad, and then somebody else will conflate toxic masculinity with all of masculinity and therefore as a direct attack on men, and then it kind of just goes to nowhere from there and people just start talking past each other. It's really shit and very unproductive. Now, setting aside the confusions about what toxic masculinity is compared to traditional masculinity or harmful masculinity, modern masculinity, and all the various other types of masculinity that there is out there, putting all that aside, toxic masculinity is unfortunately something that is necessary. It is something that we need to make sure that our society is functioning properly. I know it might sound counterintuitive to people who kind of work with the belief that toxic masculinity is kind of bad no matter what, but toxic masculinity is essentially no more than a collection of traits. And when you talk about getting rid of toxic masculinity, what you're talking about is getting rid of these traits, or at least a over-reliance on these traits. And I went to the liberty of looking up what some of the most common traits of toxic masculinity are, because I believe that this really exemplifies my point. So this is from healthline.com. It is by no means a biased source, at least as far as I can tell. It's Healthline. It's like, you know, it's health and shit. What can be less biased than wanting people to be healthy? So let's look at some of the common traits. So the first one is mental and physical toughness. Then you've got aggression, stoicism, or not displaying emotion. This I take issue with because these are two very different things. Stoicism kind of gets conflated as being kind of this emotionless, Spock-like, Vulcan-like robot, and that's not what stoicism is at all. I fully intend to make a video at some point talking about stoicism and why it is just the most misunderstood thing, especially when it comes to kind of the politics of masculinity. Is very, very misused term in my opinion. Then we've got heterosexism, or discrimination against people who aren't heterosexual, self-sufficiency, and emotional insensitivity. Now, with the notable exception of heterosexism, or just discrimination against people who aren't heterosexual, all of the other traits there, to one degree or another, maybe not emotional insensitivity actually, so maybe take that one out as well. But to actually no, you know what? I stick by it. With the exception of heterosexism, you know, the other 5 traits there, if you want to have a functioning society, you cannot just get rid of these traits. Well, you can't get rid of traits kind of at all. Like these are character traits that are going to come up as a product of someone's experiences and kind of personality and psychology and a whole lot more. It's very complicated, but you need people who have these traits. It's oversimplified to just say these are causing men all these problems, therefore we need to get rid of them. No, what we need to do is we need to address kind of the problems as they are and not blame them on a collection of kind of traits that can't really be dealt with in a systemic way. If you want to look at the systemic issues of men, I don't know how effective it is to just tell men, oh, just stop doing this, and this. It makes it a individual effort when it should be a more systemic thing that we're pushing for. Again, another video, another time. Let me get back to my point. So mental and physical toughness. Are you kidding me? What this is not just in the list. This is like the top of the list. It's not a numbered list, but when this person went through the effort to write this list, this was the one that was kind of first to mind. Mental and physical toughness is a trait of toxic masculinity. Now, maybe if you're looking at the kind of weird, overly exaggerated archetype of like a hard man and a man who's is just kind of pretending to be the toughest man possible at all times, like maybe that's pretty unhealthy. Like if you look at like alpha male gurus, for example, like the people that are putting on a front of toughness, when you know that they would fucking run away from a pillow fight. Maybe that, you know, the veneer of toughness rather than actual mental and physical toughness. But I think that mental and physical toughness is actually pretty fucking important. Also, please bear in mind, when it came to this article, I didn't go and search it out. I literally just Googled traits of toxic masculinity, and it was like one of the top articles there. I just picked one at random. This was the one that came up. But you need mental and physical toughness as a man, because you're going to deal with shit in your life. Awful things are going to happen. And if you just fucking fall to pieces whenever a bad thing happens to you, you're not going to be able to make it very, very far in life. I don't necessarily agree with Jordan Peterson on a whole bunch of stuff, but I agree with him on this, which is that you do need to be mentally and physically tough. You need to be able to weather life's storms, because life is going to throw a bunch of shit at you and you need to know how to deal with it. Okay, next thing is aggression. Now, an over-reliance on aggression, or a preoccupation, or somebody that's just, you know, aggressive like a great percentage of the time, yeah, I'll admit that's not super healthy. But aggression is something that kind of is on a scale. Now, unless you are somebody that is just hyper aggressive, I don't necessarily think that having aggression as a trait, again, is a bad thing. If you want to be able to protect yourself, you need to have a certain amount of aggression within yourself. For example, I don't have kids of my own, but my brother has kids. And if I was, I don't know, walking those kids to school and somebody came and tried to rob me, you better fucking believe I'm going to be as aggressive as possible. In business, it's not necessarily a bad thing to be aggressive if you want to be competitive, if you want to stay on top. It comes with its own problems if you over-rely on aggression, but it's not a trait that you can just kind of say, you know, everyone should stop being so aggressive. On top of that, really, what good is a soldier or a security guard or a police officer? What good is a police officer? Good question. But what good are the other two if they don't have like a certain level of aggression? You need that to keep people in line, because otherwise what's going to happen is that you're going to have people who are aggressive, who don't give a shit about everything, and they are just going to want to take what you have. That means that either you have to be aggressive, or there has to be someone who is willing to be aggressive back. Aggressive is not an attacking thing necessarily. It can be a defensive measure. And that's why it's not something that you can just hand wave away. Stoicism, or not displaying your emotion. Now, despite the fact that these two are not the same things, yes, sometimes you need to lock your shit down. Also, always preach the value of being open and vulnerable as a man, because I think that's important. Sometimes you also need to know the value of locking your shit down. You don't want to be the person that never shows emotion. You don't want to be the person that is always, you know, kind of just a stone-faced monk. But there is value in these traits. Heterosexism, as I said, I'm not even going to touch, because yeah, I think that's a trait that we could very well try to eliminate, and I think we're making massive strides in doing so. Maybe not eliminating, but definitely in reducing it as much as we can, and we're taking that in a systemic approach. So that's great. Self-sufficiency. Again, are you kidding me? How did self-sufficiency end up on a list of common traits of toxic masculinity? Now, isolation, I can see being a trait, a toxic trait that you wouldn't want to kind of express in anyone really, unless a person particularly likes being kind of isolated from everyone else. But most people don't. But self-sufficiency is a really, really weird term, because it's a synonym essentially for independence, and you need to have a level of independence. In fact, you need to have a high level of independence. Yes, you need to have people in your life, and it's even important to have people that you can depend on, but you must know that you always have to fall back on yourself because people are not going to always be there. And sometimes it's going to be because they're shitty friends, and sometimes it's going to be because they actually physically just cannot help you. People have their own stuff to deal with, and so you have to be self-sufficient to a massive degree. I believe that, especially as a man, you have got to be self-sufficient. You've got to be independent. You've got to be able to do what it is that you need to do, and you are going to have to accept the fact that you will not be able to always rely on somebody to come and help you, to come and save you. And emotional insensitivity, I think to a certain extent, sometimes you do have to be emotionally insensitive. Sometimes there is a job to be done. Again, I will always preach the value of empathy here on this channel, and just in my life generally. I think that being an empathetic person is important. But if I am a soldier and I'm fighting for my life, I'm not really going to think too much about how the person that is kind of shooting at me from across the other side of the street, I'm not going to wonder too much about, I wonder how they're feeling. Or if I am in a boxing match, I'm not going to be too concerned about whether or not the person, that I'm facing in the ring, have they had a good day so far? I wonder how their relationship with their mother is doing. No. And I get that those are not necessarily everyday life examples. And I would also still admit that an over-reliance on these traits can be a bad thing. But to just label these traits, especially something like stoicism, self-sufficiency, mental and physical toughness, as traits of a toxic form of masculinity, I think that's absolutely absurd. These traits, to the exclusion of their opposites or to the exclusion of introspection, that is a bad thing. But 99% of the time, there is no such thing as a good trait or a bad trait. There are just traits that are kind of used poorly. Character traits, emotions, these are tools, essentially. These are things that we use. As men, it is important to be aggressive, it's important to be assertive, but on the other hand, it is also important to remain calm, it is important to listen, it's important to be cooperative, it's important to embody what are essentially opposite traits simultaneously. It's the whole warrior monk thing. You have to be capable of doing what it is that you need to do to get through life, and also being able to sleep at night. It's over simplistic to just say, get rid of these traits. I've said it over and over and over again in this video. I could probably put a counter up of how many times I've said it. It's going to be in the dozens or something like that. What can I say? My vocabulary is not great. But just saying to men, stop, or, oh, we can't do that, that's toxic masculinity. These things aren't helping. They aren't changing anything. And toxic masculinity as a term is so poisoned that as soon as you say it, it will shut down all conversation. I understand the term from an academic sense because I have a psychology degree, and therefore I studied the term in an academic sense. When you say to most people toxic masculinity, they're going to hear it in the way that it has been presented to them, which is that it is a term that means men are being attacked. It doesn't mean that you can't talk about how these traits, to the exclusion of introspection or to the exclusion of their counterparts or opposites, is a thing that is potentially harmful to men. I do that on this channel, or at least I will do that on this channel. I've got 4 videos out so far. But just saying stop. When men hear toxic masculinity, they hear it as a direct attack against men, against masculinity, against this homogenous group. And I know that because I felt that way when I initially heard the term. Just saying stop is not an option. You have to create an environment in which the cultivation of these traits to healthy levels is what the norm is, and that's not what the norm is at the moment. What we have is, this is good and this is bad, stop this, do this, and it's well, no. because these traits that you're saying stop actually have a use. And if they didn't have a use, then we wouldn't have evolved to have them. You know, even something like anxiety had a use. You know, like social anxiety, for example, most likely developed out of an evolutionary fear that if we were, you know, fucking stupid, we'd get kicked out of the tribe. Or if nobody liked us, we'd get kicked out of the tribe. And then we'd just die of starvation, or like a lion would eat us or some shit. We have these traits for a reason. They won't just go away. So we need to encourage men to engage with these emotions and with these feelings and with these traits in healthy ways and with appropriate counterbalances, you know, aggression with calmness and a certain level of wisdom that comes with experience. It's not as simple as just saying stop.